He called her a beggar. In front of a room full of witnesses, in front of his mistress who wore a smirk like a freshly sharpened blade, Derek Ashford looked at his own wife. The woman who cooked his meals, drove a second-hand car, and carried a fraying tote bag to work every single morning, and told her she didn't belong at the table. "You are a beggar playing dress-up in a world that isn't yours," he said. "It never was." The room went silent. 18 executives, not one person intervened. His mistress picked up her water glass and tried, unsuccessfully, not to smile. His wife said nothing. She simply stood, buttoned one button on her worn beige trench coat, and walked out of that restaurant with the quiet composure of someone who already knew exactly how this story ended, because she had already written the ending herself in a 48-page document, 3 years in the making. What Derek Ashford did not know, what nobody in that room knew, was that the woman he had just publicly humiliated, the woman his own mother would shove into freezing rain and lock out of the house like an unwanted stray, was the chairman and majority shareholder of NovaTech Dynamics, the $700 billion tech dynasty he had spent his entire career begging to climb. She didn't just work at the company. She owned it. Every floor, every elevator, every inch of marble he straightened his tie in front of every morning, the corner office, the car allowance, the executive luncheons at Callaway's, the corporate card he smiled at waiters with like a man who had earned something. All of it hers. And here is the question that will keep you awake tonight. If she knew, and she knew from the very beginning, why did she stay silent for 3 years while they insulted her, mocked her, and treated her like something they had accidentally stepped in? What was she building inside that silence? And when a woman who owns everything, the building, the board, the company, and the documented evidence of every single cruelty ever committed against her, finally decides that enough is enough, what exactly does karma look like at $700 billion? Stay with this story, because what her mother-in-law did in that doorway on a freezing night, with her own 2 hands, in front of a camera she didn't know was watching, is the moment that will make you understand that some people don't just lose. They lose everything, all at once, in front of everybody. The lobby of NovaTech Dynamics was the kind of space that made people straighten their posture without being asked. Portuguese marble floors, imported, every slab hand-selected, a detail that appeared in the company's founding story and nowhere else, stretched 60 feet from the revolving entrance doors to the elevator banks, catching the early morning light at an angle that made them look almost liquid. The 16-foot LED installation climbing the north wall pulsed with live data from NovaTech's global network, server loads, transaction volumes, the invisible heartbeat of a $700 billion empire moving through another ordinary Tuesday morning. It hummed with the quiet, authoritative sound of something that had never once considered its own cost. Everything in this lobby had been designed to communicate one message with absolute consistency. You are standing inside something that matters. At 8:47 a.m., a woman pushed through the revolving doors, and the lobby received her the way grand spaces receive unremarkable people. Without adjustment, without acknowledgement, without a single head turning. She was 34 years old, though she carried herself with a stillness that made age difficult to read. Beige trench coat, worn soft at the cuffs from years of use. Flat shoes that whispered against the marble rather than announcing themselves. A canvas tote bag with a fraying left strap. No jewelry except a single thin ring on her right hand, engraved with initials so small they required leaning in to read. GV her hair pulled into a clean, simple knot. No makeup that announced itself. And in her right hand, a paper cup from the gas station 2 blocks west. The cheerful red and yellow sunburst logo looked aggressively out of place inside NovaTech's cathedral entrance. She carried it without apology, the way people carry things they've stopped seeing. Her name to everyone in this building was Calla Marlowe, She badged through the turnstile without breaking stride and turned left toward the B3 corridor, financial analysis, sublevel 3. She had walked this exact route every working day for 3 years. Nobody had ever followed her with their eyes. Behind the coffee kiosk near the east elevators, a young barista named Jonah watched her disappear around the corner. 23 years old, 3 months on the job, he had the gift of people who work in service, reading the architecture of a person's walk before they opened their mouth. He'd filed this woman under invisibility from his first week, not from indifference but from instinct. She moved through the lobby like someone who had made a deliberate study of how not to be noticed, and he respected the craft of it. His manager Dana had taken him aside during his second shift. The woman in the beige coat gas station cup comes in around 8:45. She never pays here. Whatever she orders, you don't charge her. Don't make it a moment. Don't ask about it. Just don't charge her. Jonah had assumed it was an HR accommodation. He didn't know that every kiosk in all 17 NovaTech locations worldwide operated under the same standing instruction about this specific woman. He didn't know that Dana had received the instruction from building operations, who received it from the executive office, authorized by a signature nobody on this floor had ever seen. 3 floors below ground level, in a small office with no window and no nameplate on the door, both absences deliberate. Calla sat down, placed her gas station cup to the right of her keyboard, and opened her laptop. The document filling her screen was 46 pages long. She had been adding to it quietly for 3 years. Before 9 a.m., she added a 47th page. She titled it, Pattern of Conduct Documented Incidents, E. Ashford. She was thinking about a phone call from that morning, about a woman named Eunice who used the word presentable as a weapon, about canvas sneakers at an engagement dinner 3 years ago, and the verdict Eunice had delivered in that single downward glance and never revisited. She was thinking about the specific architecture of sustained contempt, how it was built brick by brick, how each brick alone could be dismissed, and how 47 pages of bricks could not. She saved the document. She closed the laptop. She looked at the bare wall of her windowless office with the expression of a woman who has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the clock to catch up. She picked up her gas station cup and took a slow, unbothered sip. The empire turned 53 floors above her. Nobody looked twice at the woman who owned all of it. But somewhere on the 14th floor, a calendar notification had just landed in 18 executive inboxes, and the temperature of the entire floor had changed. The 14th floor of NovaTech Tower was where ambition came to be groomed. Glass-walled offices, precision-calibrated lighting, charcoal carpet selected by a designer briefed specifically to communicate authority without aggression. The coffee here arrived on a cart, brought by an actual person, from a Portland roaster that charged $32 per bag. The executives on this floor had been told, in various ways and through various channels, that they mattered, and they had been arranging their personalities around that information ever since. Derek Ashford occupied the corner office at the East End, which gave him the morning sun and the city grid stretching toward the river, and he had never once stopped appreciating this. He was 38, broad-shouldered and handsome in the way that required maintenance, the gym, the tailored shirts, the specific product in his hair. He had the smile of a man who had learned early that his smile was an asset and had been investing in it, compounding the returns ever since. He had grown up watching his mother perform wealth she didn't entirely possess, and he had absorbed from her the central operating principle of his life. The appearance of a rival was more immediately useful than a rival itself. He had applied this lesson with considerable skill. The corner office proved it. The car allowance confirmed it. The invitations to the right dinners ratified it. He had met Calla 3 years ago at a NovaTech charity gala. She'd been a +1 to someone he barely remembered. Quiet in a way he found genuinely restful at first. Not performing, not positioning, just present. She had laughed at something he said, a real laugh, unguarded and sudden, and something had shifted in him that he would later identify as genuine. He believed this now still. It was true, which made the drift that followed not less terrible but differently terrible. The rot arrived without announcement, the way certain changes do. Not as a decision but as a slow reorientation, and by the time he noticed he was far from the shore. Tiffany Crane had joined NovaTech 8 months ago on his recommendation, and she had the quality of a mirror that showed only favorable angles, and Derek had been standing in front of that mirror long enough to mistake it for reality. This morning he sat at his desk, monitor dark, already in his jacket, reading her text. "Tell her you have a work dinner. I made a reservation at Callaway's." Callaway's. He felt the small, ugly snag of that. He'd taken Calla there once, their first anniversary, charged to a corporate card he wasn't supposed to use for personal expenses. The guilt had lasted 3 days. He'd moved past it, which was the truest measure of where he was. He typed back, "Already done." He looked at his reflection in the dark monitor screen, the tailored jacket, the easy posture, and felt the clean satisfaction of a man who has decided his life is arranged correctly. At 11:14 a.m. his computer chimed. Subject: Q4 All Hands Leadership Luncheon Mandatory Attendance, Callaway's Private Dining Room, 1:00 p.m. Host: Office of the Chairman. The floor went quiet in the way it only did when something important was pretending to be routine. Derek stared at the invitation, feeling a flicker of irritation about the reservation conflict with Tiffany and nothing else. No premonition, no instinct that said, "Pay attention." Comfort, cultivated long enough, atrophies the senses that survival requires. He texted Tiffany, "Did you see the invite? Who even is the chairman?" Her reply, "Nobody knows, probably just a restructure." He agreed. He moved the Callaway's reservation to 8 o'clock. He straightened his already straight tie. On sublevel B3, a woman with a gas station cup was saving a 47th page. He had no idea that the invitation in his inbox had been authorized by his wife. The Ashford family home sat in a suburb that took itself very seriously. A colonial, large, symmetrical, the kind of house that communicated old money to people who didn't know what old money actually looked like. Navy front door, chosen after 3 consultations with a color specialist. 2 cars in the driveway, a current-year Mercedes belonging to Eunice, and Margot's slightly less impressive sedan, which Eunice had noted more than once with private satisfaction. Eunice Ashford was 63 and had the bearing of a woman who had decided, somewhere in her 40s, that her opinions were load-bearing architecture, permanent, structural, not open to renovation. She wore fur to grocery stores. Not vanity exactly, but a deep, practiced insistence that the world acknowledge her at the tier she believed she occupied. She had grown up with money, lost most of it when her first husband navigated a business failure badly, remarried into the Ashford name, and spent 30 years since defending that name with the ferocity of someone who knows how quickly ground shifts. She was not a stupid woman. She was, in many ways, perceptive, but she had the fatal quality of people who use perception as a weapon rather than a tool. She noticed things about people in order to diminish them, not understand them. She had decided Calla was wrong for Derek at the engagement dinner, the moment she saw the canvas sneakers. Not scuffed, not cheap, clean, careful canvas sneakers, but Eunice had looked at them, looked at Calla's face, and made a calculation she would spend 3 years defending rather than revisiting. She had never tried to understand Calla. She filed her under insufficient and locked the drawer. She would spend the rest of her life wishing she had looked more carefully. This Tuesday morning, Eunice sat at her kitchen table with French press coffee, a ritual she observed with the seriousness of ceremony, and called her daughter-in-law. Calla answered on the second ring. She always answered. She had never in 3 years sent Eunice to voicemail. Eunice interpreted this as deference. It was, in reality, documentation. Every call logged, every date and time recorded, every comment preserved with the care of someone building a case. Calla, I need you at the house Saturday. I'm hosting the Hargrove women, the Connecticut Hargroves, and I need someone to manage the catering setup. I have something this weekend, Calla said. What could you possibly have? Eunice asked, genuinely, with the bafflement of someone for whom Calla's independent existence was a category error. I'll try to be there Saturday morning, Calla said. See that you are, and Calla, wear something appropriate. Last time you looked like you'd come directly from a soup kitchen. I don't know what Derek was thinking. She hung up without waiting for a response. She never waited for Calla's responses. She had learned to end conversations before Calla could occupy them. This was a form of erasure so practiced it had become unconscious. In her windowless office, Calla set her phone down. She thought about her father, about Garrison Voss, who had built NovaTech from 2 desks in a Phoenix strip mall and died at 61 with her hand in both of his. You are going to meet people who mistake your stillness for absence, he had told her once. Let them. Absence cannot build what you're going to build. She opened the document. She typed 3 new lines at the bottom of page 47, then paused and typed 8 more. Documented pattern of contempt, sustained across 36 months. She saved it, 47 pages, 1 more to come. She didn't know yet that Eunice would write that final page herself, with her own 2 hands, on icy front steps, in front of a camera she never saw. There is a particular kind of invisible that is not the same as unseen. Petra Hollis had spent her professional life being underestimated, and she had done it deliberately, with the craft of a woman who understood that strategic invisibility was a form of power that most people never recognized because it didn't announce itself. 35 years old, close-cropped natural hair, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the specific energy of someone always in the middle of 3 things who wants you to believe she's doing nothing. Her office sat on the 7th floor tucked between a supply room and an HR pod, in a space so unremarkable that colleagues who'd worked the same floor for a year sometimes forgot it existed. Her door read, P. Hollis, HR Coordinator, Sublevel Programs. Her real title known to exactly 4 people, all of whom had signed a legal document thicker than most novels, was Director of Internal Investigations, Office of the Chairman. She reported to one person. That person drove a second-hand Civic. She and Calla had been friends for 11 years, since a graduate seminar on corporate governance where they'd been the only 2 people in the room who seemed to understand that the professor was reading from notes he didn't believe. They'd gotten coffee after and talked for 4 hours. The friendship had the tensile strength of something forged rather than assembled. It resumed mid-sentence after months apart and required no maintenance, only trust. When Garrison Voss died, it was Petra who sat in the hospital corridor with Calla for 2 hours before either of them spoke. It was Petra who helped design the identity protocol, Calla Marlowe, financial analyst, sublevel B3, and built the legal scaffolding around it so completely that NovaTech's own legal team could not trace the ownership structure without an access code that lived only in Montgomery Reeves' memory. It was Petra who embedded herself on the 7th floor and spent 3 years watching the company with the patient, comprehensive attention of someone documenting everything for a moment that had not yet arrived. That moment was Thursday. Her phone buzzed, Calla. The calendar invite went out. How's the floor looking? Wade laughed, Petra said without preamble. They always entered conversations in the middle because they always already knew the beginning. In the corridor, about the invite going to, quote, the whole building, apparently including the help. A silence. Add it, Calla said. Already typed. A comfortable silence. The load-bearing kind that only exists between people who have been through something real together. Petra, Thursday. Thursday, Petra confirmed. 1 word containing 3 years of documentation, 2 parallel files, a sealed board resolution, and the quiet patience of two women who had learned from the same man that the most permanent things are built slowly. She hung up. She looked at her screen. In the corner, a small calendar notification blinked. Thursday, all staff mandatory atrium. She had sent that notification herself at 7 a.m. on Cala's behalf. She clicked it closed. She opened Tiffany Crane's file to page 12. She added a new line. On the 14th floor above her, Derek Ashford was moving a dinner reservation. He had no idea that the woman who sent that all-staff notification was sitting 140 feet below him, adding his mistress to a document that would end both of their careers in 48 hours. The private dining room at Callaway's held 20 people comfortably, and pretension unconditionally. Dark wood paneling, amber lighting calibrated to the exact level at which expensive things looked more expensive, tablecloths ironed by someone paid specifically to iron tablecloths. The menu listed no prices. The waitstaff moved with the rehearsed quiet of people who understood that their invisibility was part of the service. By 1:00 p.m., 18 NovaTech executives occupied the central table, and the atmosphere had the texture of anxiety dressed in business casual. Nobody knew what the chairman's office announcement would contain. Nobody knew who the chairman was. This had been NovaTech mythology for years, a gap in the organizational chart that people filled with speculation. Montgomery Reeves had spent 3 years fielding these questions, with the non-answers of a man who had signed something that prevented him from doing otherwise. Montgomery sat at the head of the table beside 2 empty chairs, checking his watch and his phone in alternation, wearing the expression of someone awaiting a verdict he'd already written and still found stressful. Derek was 6 seats down, jacket pressed, coffee untouched, trying not to look at the door or at Tiffany Crane 3 seats to his left. Tiffany wore a burgundy dress that communicated advanced planning. Garrison Wade sat beside her, leaning back with the relaxed sprawl of a man who had confused being well-liked with being safe. At 1:08 the door opened. The room adjusted, collective straightening, sharpened attention. Calla walked in. The beige trench coat, the flat shoes, the canvas tote bag placed on the chair beside Montgomery, fraying strap outward. She sat without surveying the room, opened her leather portfolio, uncapped a pen. The room did the mathematics of her presence and arrived at an answer that didn't compute. Derek stared. 3 emotions crossed his face with the speed of a man who had not prepared for this. Confusion, embarrassment, then contempt. The fatal one. The one that had been growing for 8 months in Tiffany's flattering mirror. "Calla, what are you doing here?" "I was invited," she said without looking up. Tiffany made a sound, not quite a laugh, the social equivalent of a blade drawn halfway from a sheath, enough to signal intent, not enough to be caught doing it. "This is a leadership luncheon," Derek said, controlled, deliberate, performing for the audience he was aware of, for senior staff. "I'm aware," Calla said. In the far corner of the dining room, nearly invisible against the dark paneling, a small black rectangle blinked once. A CCTV camera angled toward the head of the table. Petra had confirmed its positioning that morning at 7:15 a.m. It had been recording since 12:58 p.m. Tiffany leaned toward Garrison Wade and said, not quietly enough, "Did Derek's housekeeper follow him here?" Garrison Wade laughed, caught himself. Laughed again because Tiffany was watching him and his instinct for social alignment was stronger than his instinct for self-preservation. The crowd went silent, many witnesses, not one person intervened. "Calla," Derek said, and now the voice had changed, personal, intimate, the cruelty calibrated for maximum landing. "I don't know how you got this invitation, but these are important people. You should go wait in the car. I'll explain later." Tiffany's smile appeared at the corners first. Calla looked at Derek with the expression of still water above significant depth. 3 years, 47 pages, the weight of a decision already made. "Derek," she said quietly, "you should think carefully about the next thing you say." The sentence landed with a weight several people felt without understanding. One junior executive at the far end of the table would describe it for the rest of her career. She sounded like someone reading the final line of a verdict they'd written a long time ago. Derek didn't hear the weight. Derek was performing. "Think carefully." He let out a short laugh, the audience-facing kind, the kind that invites others to join. "Look around you. These are executives, people who built things. What have you built, Calla? You are a file clerk who married above herself, and I have been patient, generous. I have carried you for 3 years, and I am done pretending you belong in rooms like this." He gestured unconsciously toward Tiffany, a compass finding north, a confession the whole room received without a sound. "Go home. You are a beggar playing dress-up in a world that isn't yours. It never was." 18 executives, silence so absolute it had texture. Tiffany Crane picked up her water glass. Montgomery Reeves had gone the color of old paper. In the corner, the CCTV camera blinked its patient red light. It recorded everything, every word, every face, every second of a silence in which not one single person said stop. She did nothing. This was the most devastating response available to her, and the room understood it instinctively without knowing why. No tears, no raised voice, no performance of injury, and no performance of indifference. She looked at Derek Ashford with the expression of a woman closing an account she had kept open too long, not angry, not wounded, simply done in the absolute, administrative sense of that word. She reached into her portfolio. She removed a single page, one page crisp, printed that morning in her windowless office, and slid it across the table to Montgomery Reeves, who received it with both hands and looked at it for 3 seconds with the expression of a man reading something he had dreaded and prepared for at the same time. Then Calla stood. She buttoned one button on her beige trench coat. She picked up her tote bag from the chair back, fraying strap and all. She looked at Derek Ashford one final time, not with hatred, because hatred would have been a kind of intimacy she no longer owed him, but with the clear, unobstructed vision of someone who has removed the last thing blocking their own sight. "I'll see you at home," she said. She walked out. The door closed behind her with the quiet, definitive sound of something ending. The room held its silence for 4 full seconds, an enormous amount of time in a room full of people professionally trained to fill silence. Then Montgomery Reeves cleared his throat. If everyone could direct their attention to the agenda, his hand, holding the single page she had slid to him, was not entirely steady. "I've just been informed that the office of the chairman will be making a formal announcement this Thursday regarding a restructuring of senior leadership." He looked up. He looked at Derek specifically, with the expression of a man delivering information to someone who needed it urgently and would not be able to use it. Attendance is mandatory. The table held a new silence, a different kind, with a different temperature. 3 seats down, Tiffany Crane was no longer smiling. She had worked at NovaTech long enough to know what office of the chairman meant in practice, which was that it meant something final, and that the people who had tried to find out exactly what had a pattern of departing the company under circumstances HR described as mutually agreeable separations that were, to anyone paying attention, neither mutual nor agreeable. She looked at the door Calla had walked through. She looked at Montgomery's face, the old paper color, the careful hands, the specific quality of a man who knew precisely what was coming. She looked at her own reflection in the surface of her water glass. For the first time in 8 months of Callaway's reservations and flattering mirrors and careful performances, Tiffany Crane felt the distinct, physical cold of understanding that she had made a very serious mistake. She didn't know how serious yet. She would know in 47 hours, in a building she thought she worked for, in front of everyone she'd ever performed for, and there would be nowhere to go. The emergency family dinner was called with less than 24 hours' notice, as Eunice's emergency dinners always were. Not because the situation was genuinely urgent, because short notice prevented people from declining. Calla arrived at 6:47 p.m. in her Civic, carrying a container of food she had cooked herself, a braised dish that had taken 2 hours. She had brought food to this house for 3 years and had it received without comment for 3 years, and she had not stopped bringing it, not because she was passive, but because every container, every receipt of it without gratitude, every replacement by a caterer was a data point. Another line in the document, another brick. Eunice opened the door before she knocked. Always. The dominance of the threshold, removing Calla's moment of arrival, inserting herself as judge before Calla could be guest. "You're late, leave the food in the kitchen. We're not using it," the caterer came. The dining room held Derek, Eunice, Margaret and her husband, and 2 women from Eunice's social circle, brought not for company but for witness. The way a certain kind of person always needs an audience for their performances of superiority. The escalation followed its established architecture, dismissive through the pre-dinner conversation, mocking during the appetizer course, a comment about the Civic needing to be retired, a reference to Calla's little job, the particular smile Eunice reserved for small cuts made in front of witnesses. By the main course, the blade was out entirely. "Derek tells me you made a scene at a work luncheon," Eunice said, cutting her meat with the precision of a woman who had never doubted her right to the knife. "At Callaway's." "I attended a meeting," Calla said. "You embarrassed my son." "Eunice." "My son," Eunice repeated, voice dropping to a temperature that made 2 of the social circle women study their plates, "has built a real career. And you have spent 3 years riding the coattail of it like a barnacle. You have nothing. No name worth mentioning, no career, no connections." She set her fork down. Fork down meant she'd moved from performance into genuine conviction, which was always worse. "Tomorrow there are changes at NovaTech. Derek may be in line for vice president. The circles that come with that title, the events, the expectations, you are not suited for them. You have never been suited for any of this." She gestured at Calla, at the gray sweater, the absence of jewelry, the whole of her, with the comprehensive dismissal of someone erasing a mark from a board. "Think seriously tonight, while you still have the dignity of the option, about removing yourself from my son's trajectory." Margaret looked at the ceiling. Derek looked at his phone. The social circle women were motionless. Nobody intervened. Calla set her napkin on the table. She stood. She picked up her jacket. "Thank you for dinner, Eunice," she said evenly. She walked to the front door. Eunice followed, because Eunice could not allow an exit without a final word. An exit without a final word belonged to the person leaving, and nothing in this house was allowed to belong to Calla. "I'm not finished," Eunice said. "I am," Calla said, reaching for the handle. Eunice put both hands on Calla's back and pushed. Not a touch, not a stumble, a deliberate two-handed shove through the open front door onto the stone front steps where the temperature was 28 degrees and the freezing rain had been falling for an hour, coating every surface in ice. Calla hit the stone. Her knee caught the edge of the top step. The container of food, 2 hours of cooking, shattered on the step below, the lid skidding across the ice. Eunice stood in the doorway, backlit by her amber chandelier, wearing her dinner clothes and her absolute certainty. "Find somewhere else to be tonight," she said. She closed the door. Across the street, a neighbor's doorbell camera blinked its steady red eye. It had been recording since Calla's Civic pulled in. It would record for another 4 minutes and 11 seconds, the exact amount of time before the front door opened again. Before Derek appeared in the warm backlight, looked at his wife on the icy steps, looked at her bleeding knee and said, "I'll call you a rideshare." He did not step outside. He did not enter the rain. He closed the door again. The camera recorded all of it. The push, the fall, the shattered container, the closed door. The 4 minutes and 11 seconds of a woman sitting alone in freezing rain while her husband finished dessert. Every second, timestamped, saved. Warning: pause before we go further. If you are watching this right now and your blood is boiling, good. It should be. Eunice just shoved her daughter-in-law onto icy steps in freezing rain. Derek just closed the door on her, and a camera across the street recorded every single second of it. Before we get to Thursday, before you watch karma arrive with the full weight of $700 billion behind it, we need to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city, your country, your continent in the comments right now. We have viewers joining from every corner of the world and we want to see you. And if you are not subscribed yet, what are you doing? Hit that subscribe button right now. We are on our way to 1,000 subscribers, and this community is growing fast because of stories exactly like this one. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and make sure you are there when part 2 drops, because the termination scene, the board announcement, and what happens to Eunice when that envelope arrives at her door will make everything you just watched feel like the opening act. We are not done, not even close. Now back to Kala, on the steps, in the rain, making a phone call that sets everything in motion. She sat on the steps for 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Not because she was stunned. She named what had occurred in exact language, the way her father had taught her to process every significant event, without softening, without performance. My mother-in-law placed both hands on my back and shoved me through a doorway onto icy stone steps in 28-degree weather. My knee is bleeding. My husband finished his dessert. She looked at the broken container on the step below her. She picked up the largest piece and set it neatly on the bottom step, because she was a person who did not leave disorder for others to navigate, even now, perhaps especially now. The front door opened at the 4 minutes 11 second mark. Derek stood in the warm backlight of the foyer, dinner jacket still on, looking at her on the steps with an expression that moved through something. Not nothing. There was not complete nothing, which was perhaps the most painful part of it, and then he said, "I'll call you a rideshare." He did not step outside. He did not enter the rain. He held the warm doorframe and offered her a rideshare, and then he closed the door. Across the street, the neighbor's doorbell camera blinked its small red eye and recorded the closed door and the woman and the ice and the silence. Kala got up. She walked to her Civic, got in, and sat with the engine off for exactly 30 seconds. Then she started the car. Then she called Petra. "Thursday is moved up," she said. Her voice was steady in the way that a building is steady in the final second before controlled demolition, structured, intentional, irreversible. "I want the board notification sent tonight. Security protocols activated at every entry point by 7 a.m. And Petra." "Yes." "Pull the CCTV from the Callaway's private dining room. Yesterday, 1:00 to 2:00 p.m. Format it and file it under IA 2024047. "Already done," Petra said. A pause. "Kala, are you?" "I'm fine." "Your voice is doing the thing." "What thing?" "The thing it does when you're not fine, but you've decided to be fine in approximately 36 hours. A silence that contained the history of their friendship. 11 years, a hospital corridor, 2 hours without words. 36 hours, Kala said. "I'll have everything ready." Before they hung up, Petra added, "Montgomery called. Tiffany Crane filed an internal complaint this afternoon against you. She said you attended a restricted leadership event without authorization." "A beat." "She filed it with HR," Petra said. "She filed it with me." The silence that followed was the sound of a trap closing from the inside. The specific, irreversible click of someone who had believed they had power filing a complaint against the person who owned the entire filing system. "Add it to her file," Kala said. She hung up. She looked through the rain-blurred windshield at Eunice's house, the navy door, the amber windows, the carefully maintained colonial that communicated old money to people who didn't know what old money looked like. She thought about her father, about the specific weight of what he had left her, not just the empire but the instruction. Document everything, decide nothing from emotion, and when the moment arrives, let the evidence speak with the full weight of everything you gathered. The moment was arriving. She put the car in reverse and pulled away from the curb. Behind her, Eunice's amber windows glowed warm and satisfied, and entirely unaware that 48 hours from now, a certified envelope would arrive at that navy door with her name on it. The lobby of NovaTech Dynamics looked the same on Thursday morning. The marble floors caught the light with their usual liquid quality. The LED installation cycled through its usual cascade of global network data. Jonah was behind the coffee kiosk at his usual time, in his usual position, preparing the first orders of the morning with his usual focused quiet. But the lobby was not the same, and people who worked in large organizations long enough developed a sensitivity for this. The quality of a day when something has already happened, and the news simply hasn't reached the air yet. It was in the 3 additional security personnel stationed at positions that appeared casual and were not. It was in the way the building operations manager stood near the elevator bank at 7:45 a.m., doing nothing in particular with the focused attention of someone doing something very specific. It was in the sealed notification that had landed in the board members' inboxes at 11:47 p.m. the previous night, authorized by an electronic signature none of the executive floor had ever seen. At 8:47 a.m., Calavas walked through the revolving doors. Gas station cup, fraying tote bag, flat shoes, beige trench coat, the same one. She had not changed it. She wanted Derek, when he saw her today, to see that coat and understand in his body what his mind had refused to register. She walked to the turnstile, badged through, turned not left toward B3 but right toward the main elevator bank. She pressed the call button for the executive elevator, the one that required a second badge for the penthouse floor. She pressed her badge to the reader. The reader turned green. Jonah set down the espresso cup he was holding. In 3 months on the job, he had never, not once, seen anyone badge into the penthouse elevator. He had been told during orientation that the penthouse floor was the office of the chairman. He had filed this information under building mythology alongside stories about the original founding team and a rumor about a dispute that had removed 3 board members in a single afternoon 5 years ago. He watched the elevator doors close around the woman with the gas station cup. He stood very still for a moment. Then he picked up his portafilter, because there was a line forming, because the world continued its ordinary motion even when something extraordinary was happening inside the same building. And this was perhaps the most consistent quality of extraordinary things. They happened inside ordinary days, unremarkably, and you only understood their size when you were standing on the other side of them. The elevator took 42 seconds to reach the top. On the 14th floor, Derek Ashford was reviewing Q4 projections with the calm of a man who believed today was an ordinary Thursday with a mandatory all-staff meeting and a restructure announcement he would attend with practiced executive composure. His phone showed 3 unanswered texts from Calla since Wednesday night. He had told himself he would deal with that this weekend, after things settled. He did not know that things were settling right now, 40 floors above him, with a precision and finality that made settling the exact wrong word. He did not know that the woman he had told to go wait in the car was standing in an office that contained a framed photograph of a 2-desk startup in Phoenix. The original 2 desks of the company he had spent his career climbing, and that she was looking at it the way a person looks at something that belongs to them before they go introduce themselves to a room that didn't know it. At 10:00 a.m., every employee in NovaTech's headquarters received a mandatory all-staff notification. Not the executive floor only, not leadership only, Every employee, the analysts, the assistants, the engineers, the HR coordinators, the baristas, the building operations manager who had been standing near the elevator bank at 7:45 a.m. Every person in the building received the same message. Announcement from the office of the chairman. Main atrium. 10:30 a.m. Mandatory. The atrium had 6 floors of open balconies looking down at the lobby level, which had been fitted that morning, quickly, efficiently, by a team that had been briefed 2 days prior, with a temporary podium and a sound system wired to speakers on all 6 levels. By 10:20, every balcony was filling. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the railings, looking down at the podium with the focused, slightly unsettled attention of people who don't know what they're about to be told. Derek arrived on the 14th floor balcony at 10:12. He looked down at the atrium packed with hundreds of faces and felt, for the first time since Tuesday, a flicker of something he couldn't name. He pulled out his phone to text Tiffany and found she wasn't responding. He looked across the atrium to the 16th floor balcony but couldn't find her face in the crowd. At 10:29, Montgomery Reeves stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked up at the 6 floors of faces looking down at him, and he was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, not for theater, because Montgomery Reeves was not a theatrical man, but because he was genuinely moved, in the way that people are moved by things they have been waiting for long enough that the arrival feels like relief. Good morning. For the past several years, NovaTech Dynamics has been led from a position of intentional privacy by our chairman and majority shareholder. Today, at her direction and by her choice, that changes. He paused. I'd like to introduce the founder's daughter, the architect of our last 3 fiscal years' growth strategy, and the person who has been, for reasons she will explain better than I can, among you this entire time. Calla Voss walked to the podium. Not Calla Marlowe, not the woman with the gas station cup, not the file clerk, not the beggar, not the barnacle Calla Voss in the beige trench coat, the flat shoes, the fraying tote bag set on the chair behind the podium with a deliberateness that the entire building felt without understanding. She stepped up to the microphone and looked at 800 faces looking back at her. On the 14th floor balcony, Derek Ashford looked at his wife's face on 6 simultaneous atrium screens, and his brain performed a slow, terrible, irrevocable calculation. My name is Calla Voss, she said. Her voice was clear and carried without effort. My father, Garrison Voss, built this company with 11 employees and one belief, that technology should be built by people of integrity for people of integrity. He also believed that power, when inherited rather than earned, corrupts both the person who receives it and the people around them. She looked across the atrium, all 6 floors of it, the hundreds of faces, the balconies, and their held breath. I have spent 3 years working in this building as a financial analyst. I watched how this company treats its people when no one important is watching. A pause. I was always watching. The atrium was 800 people not breathing. Effective today, I am assuming the role of active chairman and CEO. I have some announcements. On the 14th floor, Derek's hand found the balcony railing. He held it with the grip of a man who has felt the ground shift under him and is trying to determine whether it will stop. It would not stop. The CCTV footage from Callaway's was already filed. The doorbell camera footage from Wednesday night was already filed. The 48-page document was already filed. 48 pages, 3 years, every receipt, every dated comment, every witnessed incident, cross-referenced and formatted with the irreversible weight of everything that had been quietly gathered. It was all already done. It had been done before she walked into the luncheon, before she sat on the icy steps, before she got in her Civic and drove away in the freezing rain. It had been done from the very beginning. She had simply been waiting for the clock to catch up. Montgomery Reeves returned to the podium after Calla's remarks. He held a single page. He read from it the way accountants read from documents, without emphasis, without theater, which was its own devastating form of theater. Effective immediately, the following personnel actions are in force. pursuant to Internal Investigation File IA 2024047. The atrium held its silence. Derek Ashford, Senior Sales Director, terminated, effective immediately, pending formal review of documented conduct including misuse of corporate expense accounts, sustained hostile conduct toward a protected employee, and behavior incompatible with NovaTech standards of professional integrity. Security will escort Mr. Ashford from the premises. On the 14th floor balcony, the colleague standing near Derek took the smallest possible physical steps away from him. Not coordinated, not obvious, just the instinctive human movement away from a lightning rod. Nobody said anything. Nobody put a hand on his shoulder. He stood very still with both hands on the railing and looked at his name on the 6 atrium screens and felt the specific, irreversible cold of understanding that the ground had not finished shifting. Tiffany Crane, Vice President of Marketing, terminated, effective immediately, pursuant to File IA 2024047, including documented submission of a fraudulent HR complaint and a sustained pattern of workplace harassment. Security will escort Ms. Crane from the premises. On the 16th floor balcony, Tiffany Crane went completely still. The people around her did what the people around Derek were doing, the quiet, instinctive subtraction of proximity, and she stood alone in a ring of empty space with nowhere to direct her eyes that didn't hold a screen showing Montgomery Reeves reading her name from a list. Garrison Wade, Vice President of Product, placed on formal performance review, pending File IA 2024047. Mr. Wade is advised to retain legal counsel. Wade's relaxed sprawl was gone. He was upright, hands at his sides, the color of a man doing very fast arithmetic about which specific moments of his conduct had been witnessed and recorded and by whom. The security team was already at the elevator banks on each floor, calm, professional, thorough. Derek was escorted through the 14th floor corridor, through the elevator, down through the lobby. He passed the marble floors. He passed the LED installation, his wife's installation, he understood now, in his wife's building. He passed the coffee kiosk where Jonah was watching with wide, careful eyes and holding a cup he would always remember holding. He reached the turnstile. Out of 3 years of habit, he reached for his badge. The security officer placed a gentle hand on his elbow. "This way, sir." Derek looked at the turnstile reader. It was red. His badge had been deactivated in real time, the exact moment his name left Montgomery's mouth. He looked at that red light for a long moment, long enough for 2 junior analysts coming in from lunch to sidestep around him and avoid his eyes. Then he walked out through the revolving doors. Into the ordinary street, into the ordinary city, into the first morning of the rest of a life he had not planned for, on the other side of every assumption he had ever made about himself. Behind him, the revolving doors completed their rotation. The lobby resumed its ordinary motion. The marble floors caught the light. The empire turned. And on the penthouse floor, 42 seconds above all of it, the woman he had called a beggar was sitting at her father's desk, in front of a framed photograph of 2 desks in a Phoenix strip mall, beginning the first official day of the rest of her life. The certified envelope arrived at the Ashford Colonial on Thursday afternoon at 2:34 p.m. Eunice saw it from the front window, the postal carrier, the flat envelope, the return address printed in clean sans serif type that she didn't recognize until she had it in her hands and read, NovaTech Dynamics, Office of Legal Affairs. She did not yet know about the morning. Margaret had called at 2:17. Eunice had let it go to voicemail, assuming it was about the weekend. She had not spoken to Derek since the previous night. She had spent the morning in the comfortable, sealed silence of someone who considers their world adequately managed. She opened the envelope. Inside, 2 documents. The first was a formal letter of removal from the advisory board of the Garrison Voss Foundation. the philanthropic arm of NovaTech that she had joined 3 years ago through a connection she had believed was purely social, a dinner introduction, a gracious expansion of her network. The letter was brief. It stated cause, conduct incompatible with the Foundation's commitment to the dignity of all persons. The second document was a photograph, a single printed frame from a video file, time-stamped Wednesday night at 9:02 p.m. It showed the front steps of her own house. It showed Eunice in the doorway, backlit by her own chandelier, hands extended. It showed Calla on the wet stone, knee caught on the step edge, the broken container below her. The image was clear. The timestamp was clear. The hands were unmistakably Eunice's. At the bottom of the letter, in the signature block, Calla Voss, Chairman, NovaTech Dynamics. Eunice stood in her foyer, the foyer with the amber chandelier, the navy door, the aggressively maintained house, and looked at her daughter-in-law's real name for the first time in her life. The name that had been there all along, behind the canvas sneakers and the gas station cups and the brought food and the answered phone calls, and the quiet, patient, 3-year accumulation of every cruelty that Eunice had delivered and forgotten, and Calla had delivered and documented. Her phone rang. It was the Foundation's executive director. Then it rang again. It was Margaret. Then it rang again. It was a woman from her social circle with a voice that had changed temperature. Eunice did not answer any of them. She sat down in her living room, in the house built on a name she married into, and for the first time in the tenure of this story, she sat with the silence of a world that had stopped answering her. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in the incremental, compounding way of a world that had simply recalibrated around the weight of documented truth. The Hargrove Women's Gathering happened Saturday. Eunice attended. She wore her fur. She did not mention Derek's career. She mentioned instead that she had parted ways with the Voss Foundation over philosophical differences. One of the Hargrove women smiled and said nothing, and later that evening looked up the Foundation's restructuring announcement and saved the date. Eunice's world did not collapse. It contracted slowly by degrees, by the quiet subtraction of invitations and returned warmth, and the particular regard that people extend to those whose proximity carries benefit. It was the loneliness of someone who had always mistaken compliance for love, always mistaken an audience for affection, and who now, in the gradually narrowing world of her own construction, was beginning to understand the difference. This was the appropriate punishment, not sudden destruction. Eunice was too armored for that. Her punishment was a world that, incrementally, stopped pretending to agree with her. It was the slow, patient justice of a woman who had been shoved onto icy steps and had not needed to do a single theatrical thing in return, because the evidence spoke with a clarity that no performance could have matched. 6 months later, Derek Ashford took the bus to a mid-sized logistics firm where he held a junior account role and was learning, slowly and without comfort, the difference between the person he had been and the person he might become. He had not spoken to his mother in 3 months, not from anger, but from a new and painful clarity about the voice he had been listening to for 38 years. Tiffany Crane discovered that NovaTech's reach in the industry was considerable, and that professional references mattered, and that VP title on her resume led to questions she didn't have good answers for. She started a lifestyle blog. It was not going well. And Calla Voss sat in the penthouse office of NovaTech Tower on a Tuesday morning. 6 months after Thursday, 1 year from the beginning of the year, she had quietly decided would be the last year of silence, with a gas station coffee cup on the desk beside her laptop, because she liked it, and a leather portfolio open to page 1 of a new document, and her father's photograph on the wall in front of her. The city was 42 floors below. The empire turned. The LED installation in the lobby pulsed with the live data of a $700 billion company moving through another ordinary Tuesday morning. She opened her laptop. She began the first item on the first agenda of the rest of her life. She was, in every measurable way, exactly where she was always going to be. Some women wait for rescue. Calla Voss waited for Thursday. End of part 1. Part 2 is coming. Derek's full collapse. Tiffany's unraveling. The moment Eunice finally comes to the door that won't open. And the one secret even Petra doesn't know, the one thing in Calla's father's will that will change everything again. Don't go anywhere. Comment part 2 if you want us to drop part 2 immediately. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Please get us to 1K subscribers.